It started with a flicker on a screen, just a tiny unexpected blip in the data stream from the Vera C. Rubin Observatory in Chile. At first, no one thought much of it. Space is full of odd signals, cosmic rays, satellite glitches, distant stars flaring up. But this one didn't fade, it stayed, and then it moved, against the natural flow of objects in the outer solar system. Within hours, observatories across the globe were pointing their lenses toward the same patch of sky. Japan, South Africa, Australia, Germany, they all saw it. A dark, irregular shape about the size of a city block, drifting near the orbit of Neptune. It wasn't tumbling like an asteroid. It was steering, slowing down with impossible precision, as if it knew exactly where it wanted to go. People on Earth didn't panic right away. Most didn't even know. But in the quiet rooms of space agencies and defense ministries, alarms began to sound. Not loud sirens, but the kind that echo in hushed voices and encrypted messages. Scientists ran simulations. Could it be a piece of old space junk? A secret military test? Nothing fit. The object's trajectory defied known physics. It decelerated without exhaust plumes, without visible propulsion. It just stopped. Then came the first real sign that this wasn't just a visitor. It was a message. One Tuesday morning, 3 communication satellites, 2 commercial, 1 scientific, suddenly went dark. Not from solar flares or technical failure. Their electronics had been fried by a focused microwave burst, narrow and clean, like a laser beam made of radio waves. The timing was too perfect. The location? Directly in the path between the mystery object and Earth. That's when the world started paying attention. News channels scrambled. Social media exploded with theories, aliens, secret weapons, government cover-ups. But behind the noise, something more serious was happening. For the first time in decades, rival nations began sharing data. The US sent raw telescope feeds to Beijing. Russia opened its deep space radar logs to European scientists. Even countries with strained relations agreed on one thing. Whatever was out there, it wasn't human. Governments tried to stay calm in public. Press briefings spoke of anomalous space phenomena and ongoing analysis. But in secure bunkers and command centers, military leaders were preparing for the unthinkable. Fighter jets were put on standby. Early warning systems scanned the skies not for missiles, but for something far stranger. What scared people most wasn't the object itself. It was the silence. It didn't broadcast music or math equations like in the old movies. It didn't try to talk. It just watched. And then it acted. A month after its arrival, it moved again, this time inward toward Mars. It hovered near the red planet for days, scanning, mapping. Then, without warning, it fired something small and fast. Not a bomb. Not a laser. A tungsten rod no bigger than a telephone pole accelerated to hypersonic speed. It struck the International Lunar Research Base on the Moon's near side with the force of a small earthquake. 12 people died instantly. The base's oxygen systems ruptured, solar arrays shattered. The emergency beacon sent one final transmission before going silent. We're under attack. Not natural. Repeat, not natural. That changed everything. Overnight, the debate ended. This wasn't a probe. It wasn't lost or curious. It was testing Earth's defenses and finding them weak. Panic rippled through cities. Supermarkets emptied. Airports flooded with people trying to get home. But something else happened too, something quieter, deeper. Neighbors checked on each other. Strangers shared generators during rolling blackouts caused by satellite failures. Online, instead of conspiracy rants, people posted survival tips, translated into dozens of languages. A sense of shared fate began to grow. World leaders, long divided by trade wars, climate disputes, and old grudges, found themselves in emergency video calls that lasted through the night. Old enemies sat in the same virtual room, not as rivals, but as humans facing the same threat. One senior diplomat later admitted, "For the first time, we weren't thinking about borders. We were thinking about home." Scientists worked around the clock. They studied every fragment of data, the object's movements, the energy signature of the microwave pulse, the crater left on the moon. They realized the attack wasn't meant to destroy humanity. It was meant to disable, to blind, to see how Earth would react when its eyes in the sky went dark, and Earth had flinched, but not for long. In hidden labs and repurposed missile silos, engineers began sketching plans. Not for surrender, but for a warning so powerful, so undeniable that even an alien mind would understand. We are not helpless. The world still didn't know what the object wanted. Resources? Territory. Was it alone or just the tip of something much larger? No one could say. But one truth became clear. Earth had been given a test. And if it failed again, there might not be a third chance. So while children looked up at the night sky with new fear, and parents held their kids a little tighter, a different kind of resolve took root. Not born from anger, but from the simple, stubborn will to protect everything that made Earth worth living on. The oceans, the forests, the laughter in crowded streets, the quiet moments between sunrise and dawn. The object still floated near Mars, silent and dark. But down on the planet below, humanity was no longer just watching. It was preparing, and for the first time in its history, it was doing it together. The silence after the moon attack didn't last long. Just 3 days later, the sky began to flicker again, not with stars, but with failures. GPS signals started dropping out in patches across the globe. Airplanes circling for landing had to rely on old-school radio beacons. Ships at sea lost their navigation. Emergency services scrambled as dispatch systems glitched. It wasn't a full blackout, but something more precise, more surgical, like someone was plucking out Earth's nerves one by one. Then came the drones. Tiny, fast, and nearly invisible to radar, they spilled from the object near Mars like sparks from a fire. No bigger than a shoebox, they zipped through low Earth orbit, targeting satellites with chilling efficiency, not with explosions, but with short, sharp pulses that fried circuits without leaving debris. Within a week, over a third of the planet's communication and observation satellites were dead. Weather forecasts grew unreliable. Live news feeds cut out. Even internet traffic slowed to a crawl in some regions. People felt it in their daily lives. A farmer in Kenya couldn't check crop prices. A doctor in Brazil lost connection during a remote surgery consultation. A student in Canada couldn't submit her final exam online. The world hadn't been plunged into darkness, but it had been nudged off balance like a table with one leg suddenly shorter than the others. And still, no message. No demands, just pressure. That's what made it so terrifying. This wasn't an invasion with flags and speeches. It was a test of will, and Earth was failing it. But something shifted in those tense days. Fear didn't vanish, but it began to mix with something else, determination. In cities and villages alike, people started asking, what can we do? Community centers turned into emergency coordination hubs. Ham radio operators, once seen as hobbyists, became vital links between towns. Engineers volunteered to retrofit old ground-based navigation systems. Teachers printed paper maps for students. It wasn't high-tech, but it was human, and it worked. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, the world's most powerful nations did something almost unthinkable. They stopped arguing. For years, they'd been locked in competition over technology, resources, influence. But now, with satellites falling and no one safe, old rivalries seemed small. Secret meetings turned into open collaborations. Military satellites were shared for civilian use. Intelligence agencies swapped data without red tape. Even countries that hadn't spoken in decades exchanged technical teams. No one trusted each other completely, but they trusted the threat more. Out of this fragile unity came the Global Defense Integration Protocol, or GDIP, a plan so bold it would have been laughed at just months before. The idea? Pool every nation's space tracking radar, missile warning systems, and orbital defense tech into one network. One brain, one shield. It wasn't easy. Some governments worried about giving up control. Others feared betrayal. But when a second kinetic strike hit, an abandoned weather station in Antarctica this time, as if to prove they could reach anywhere, the last holdouts signed on. Scientists worked day and night, fueled by coffee, anxiety, and a strange new hope. They studied the debris from disabled satellites, reverse engineering the drone pulses. They mapped the scouts' movements, looking for patterns. And slowly a picture emerged. This wasn't a warship. It was a scout, a single advanced probe sent ahead of something much larger. Its job wasn't to conquer. It was to decide whether Earth was worth conquering, or whether it should just be erased before the main force arrived. That realization hit like ice water. If they were being evaluated, then every response mattered. Every show of strength or weakness was being recorded, analyzed, filed away. The drones weren't just disabling tech. They were measuring Earth's resilience. How fast could systems recover? How well could people adapt? Did humanity panic? Or organize? So Earth chose to organize. In shipyards, workers began modifying old rocket launchers. In labs, physicists tested new ways to focus energy beams using mirrors in orbit. In underground command centers, young analysts, many still in their 20s, sat side by side with veterans of past wars, building simulations of what might come next. No one knew if they'd succeed. But for the first time, failure wasn't an option they could afford. Then came the breakthrough. A team in Japan noticed something odd. The Scout avoided certain frequencies. Not out of fear, but caution. It treated specific energy bands like hazards. Further tests revealed it was sensitive to high-intensity microwave bursts, especially when reflected off planetary surfaces. That gave engineers an idea. What if they couldn't destroy the Scout, but could make Earth too dangerous to approach? The plan was risky. It meant turning peaceful infrastructure into potential weapons. But with lives on the line between defense and offense blurred. Countries began quietly moving assets. Old nuclear warheads, long slated for dismantling, were pulled from storage not to be used as bombs but as power sources for directed energy systems. Rocket silos once aimed at enemies were reprogrammed to launch defensive platforms into orbit. Even civilian space companies joined in, offering cargo drones and fuel depots for the effort. No one called it a war. They called it preparation, but everyone knew the truth. Earth was drawing a line in the cosmic sand. And then, just as the first prototype shield generator powered up over the Pacific, the Scout did something new. It stopped attacking. For 48 hours, the drones vanished. The microwave pulses ceased. The object near Mars went completely dark. No emissions, no movement. At first, people thought it was a trick, a lull before the storm. But as the silence stretched, a different fear crept in. Had it already decided? Had Earth shown enough strength? Or had it shown too much weakness? In homes around the world, families gathered not just for comfort, but for conversation. Parents explained to children that sometimes standing tall doesn't mean shouting. It means staying calm, working together, and refusing to break. In schools, lessons shifted from history of wars to stories of cooperation, how humans rebuilt after disasters, shared vaccines during pandemics, rescued strangers in floods and fires. Because deep down, everyone understood. This wasn't just about technology or firepower. It was about who humanity chose to be when the universe was watching, and Earth was still writing its answer. The Scout waited. The world held its breath. And in the quiet hum of control rooms, launch pads, and neighborhood radios, a new kind of courage took root. Not loud, not flashy, but steady. The kind that says, we're still here, and we're not giving up. After weeks of tension, something unexpected happened. People stopped waiting to be saved. They started building. Not just governments or scientists, but ordinary folks in garages, classrooms, farms, and city apartments. With satellites down and supply chains shaky, communities began fixing what they could, sharing what they had, and teaching each other old skills that suddenly felt new again. Ham radios crackled to life in neighborhoods. Hand-drawn maps replaced digital ones. Kids learned Morse code in school, not as a game, but as a lifeline. But the real shift was happening higher up, in orbit, in labs, in command centers that now operated under a single banner, Earth Coalition Command, or ECC. It wasn't a government. It wasn't a military. It was something the world had never tried before. A true global team, made of engineers, linguists, pilots, programmers, and physicists from every corner of the planet, all working toward one goal, not to fight, but to warn. They called it Project Aegis. Not a weapon exactly, but a statement. The idea was simple, even if the execution wasn't. Take old nuclear warheads, machines built for destruction, and repurpose them into something else entirely. Strip away the bombs. Keep the energy. Use that power to fuel focused beams of light and heat, aimed not at enemies but at empty space. The goal? To show whoever was watching that Earth could turn its own defenses into a shield so strong, so bright, that attacking it would be like flying into the heart of a star. No one wanted to use it, but everyone agreed they had to be ready to. While engineers worked on the hardware, another group tackled the harder problem: how to talk to something that didn't speak human languages, or maybe didn't even think like humans at all. Linguists, artists, mathematicians, and even musicians came together. They didn't send math equations or prime numbers like in the old movies. Instead, they built a message layered with meaning. Images of Earth's oceans and forests, sounds of rain and laughter, patterns showing cooperation, people helping each other after earthquakes, sharing food during droughts, rebuilding together after fires. Then woven through it all a clear warning, a simulation of what would happen if a hostile fleet entered the solar system. Not a threat of revenge, but a demonstration of consequence. The message was broadcast in every way possible: radio waves, laser pulses, even modulated neutrino streams. Particles so tiny they pass through planets like ghosts, but which advanced civilizations might still detect. It wasn't just we exist, it was we are united. We protect our home, and we will not go quietly. Back on the ground, life kept going, but differently. Markets ran on barter in some places. In others, local councils organized food distribution using bicycle messengers and chalkboard schedules. People planted more gardens not just for food, but for hope. Every seed pushed into soil felt like a quiet act of defiance against the fear hanging in the sky. And then came the moment no one expected. A small group of fishermen off the coast of Indonesia reported something strange. Their old analog radar, never connected to satellites, picked up a faint echo near the moon. Not from the scout, but from something else. A second object? Or just space junk? They reported it through a chain of coastal radio operators, and within hours the ECC had confirmed it. A tiny fragment, likely broken off during the lunar strike, tumbling silently through space. But instead of ignoring it, the ECC did something remarkable. They asked for help from everyone. They released the object's predicted path online in simple terms, with instructions on how to spot it using backyard telescopes or even strong binoculars. Within days, thousands of people, from teenagers in Argentina to retirees in Finland, were tracking that little piece of debris, sending in sightings, helping refine its orbit. It wasn't about the fragment. It was about proving that Earth's eyes were still open, that even without satellites, humanity could watch the sky together. That small act sparked something bigger. Schools held skywatch nights, amateur astronomers shared live streams, artists painted the object's path across city walls. It became a symbol not of fear but of shared attention, of care. Meanwhile, Project Aegis moved faster than anyone thought possible. Rockets once meant to carry weapons were now loaded with shield generators. Launch sites from Kazakhstan to French Guiana hummed with activity. Workers pulled double shifts not for pay but because they believed in what they were building. One technician later said, "I used to fix missiles that could kill millions. Now I'm helping build something that might save us all." That changes how you see your hands. The scout near Mars still hadn't moved, but it was listening. They could tell by the way it adjusted its orientation slightly after each broadcast. It wasn't attacking, but it wasn't leaving either. It was waiting to see what Earth would do next, and Earth chose clarity over chaos. In a move that stunned even its own leaders, the ECC decided to go public, not with secrets, but with truth. They streamed live footage of Project Aegis preparations, not to scare people, but to show them, this is what we're doing. This is why, and you're part of it. For the first time, the world saw engineers from rival nations working side by side, speaking different languages but understanding each other perfectly through shared purpose. They saw scientists explaining complex physics using hand gestures and kitchen props. They saw calm, not panic. That honesty built trust. People stopped hoarding. They started volunteering. Hospitals trained civilians in basic first aid. Factories retooled to make parts for ground-based communication relays. Even artists contributed, designing symbols that could be understood across cultures to be included in the next message. Because everyone understood now, this wasn't about winning a battle. It was about showing the galaxy that Earth wasn't just a planet with resources, it was a home with heart. A place worth respecting, and if respect couldn't be earned with kindness alone, then it would be backed by strength. As the first Aegis module launched into orbit, not with a roar of war but with a quiet hum of purpose, people around the world looked up, not in fear but in quiet pride. They weren't just surviving. They were standing together, and whatever came next, they'd face it not as separate nations but as one people. The message was ready. The shield was rising. and Earth, for the first time in its long history, spoke with a single voice. Not of anger, but of warning, wrapped in the hope that maybe, just maybe, the universe was listening. The silence from the scout lasted 3 days. Then, without warning, it spoke, not with sound, but with light. A beam of particles so fine and fast it slipped through Earth's weakened defenses like a whisper through a keyhole. It didn't hit a city or a base. It struck nothing at all. Instead, it carried information, dense, complex, and unlike anything human science had ever seen. At first, no one could make sense of it. The data poured in through every surviving receiver, a flood of patterns that looked like static but moved with eerie rhythm. Teams across the globe worked around the clock, feeding the signal into every kind of decoder, mathematical, linguistic, even musical. Nothing clicked, until a young researcher in Norway noticed something. The signal wasn't random. It was structured, like a story told in layers. Slowly, painstakingly, they peeled it back. The first layer showed stars, thousands of them, mapped in a spiral pattern that didn't match our galaxy. Then came planets, most of them scorched, cracked, lifeless. One system stood out, a sun dimming fast, its worlds frozen or burning. And around it, ruins. Not buildings, but orbital skeletons. Shattered rings, broken megastructures, the ghostly remains of a civilization that had once reached for the stars and lost everything. The message wasn't a threat. It was a warning from someone else who had been tested and failed. The scout wasn't an invader. It was a refugee. Its creators were dying, their home star collapsing, their fleets scattered across the void. They weren't looking to conquer Earth out of greed, but out of desperation. They needed a new home, and their rules were simple. If a world resisted too strongly, it was marked for total erasure on their return, to save time and resources. If it surrendered quietly, it might be spared. As a colony, not a home. That changed everything. Now Earth wasn't just facing a faceless enemy. It was facing another species on the edge of extinction, making brutal choices to survive. The moral weight of that hit hard. Some argued they should offer help, share knowledge, find a peaceful path. Others said desperation makes beings dangerous. Look at human history. You don't invite a drowning person onto a small boat if they might pull you under trying to climb in. While the debate raged in council rooms, the scout did something chilling. It began transmitting again, but this time not to Earth. It aimed a narrow, high-energy burst toward deep space, far beyond Pluto. A beacon. A signal home, coordinates, and a verdict. The data analysts confirmed it within hours. The transmission contained Earth's location, atmospheric composition, defense status, and a single symbol repeated over and over. In their language, it meant, high resistance, prepare annihilation protocol. The fleet was coming, not in years. Not in decades. Based on the energy signature and trajectory models, the main force could arrive in as little as 18 months. Maybe less. Panic threatened to return. But this time it didn't take hold. Because now people understood the stakes, not just survival, but how they survived. Would Earth become a graveyard to prove a point? Or would it stand firm without becoming monsters themselves? The Earth Coalition Command made a decision that would define their species. They wouldn't hide. They wouldn't beg. And they wouldn't strike first. Instead, they would show strength so absolute, so undeniable, that even a desperate civilization would think twice. Project Aegis shifted into its final phase. All 37 repurposed launch vehicles, once symbols of human division, were loaded not with warheads but with solar focusing arrays and plasma initiators. Their target wasn't the scout. It was the sun itself. Using a theory first proposed in the 2030s, engineers planned to position the modules in a precise ring around the sun's equator. When activated, they would use the star's own gravity like a lens, bending and amplifying energy into a shell of superheated plasma surrounding the entire inner solar system. Any ship entering that zone, no matter how advanced, would be vaporized before it crossed Mars's orbit. It was audacious, dangerous. If something went wrong, the feedback could destabilize satellites or even affect Earth's magnetosphere. But the alternative was worse. While the rockets prepared for launch, the final message was crafted. Not with fear, but with dignity. It included the full story of humanity, our wars, yes, but also our art, our compassion, our recovery from disasters. It showed children planting trees, doctors healing strangers, communities rebuilding after floods, And then, clearly, it showed the Aegis shield activating in simulation, not as a boast but as a boundary. Come in peace, the message said in every symbol and frequency they could manage, and you will find neighbors. Come to take and you will find fire. The launch day arrived under clear skies. People gathered not in stadiums but in backyards, on rooftops, and quiet fields. No speeches. No fanfare. Just the distant rumble of engines as rockets lifted off from 6 continents at once, carrying the hope of a united world. As the last module reached orbit and locked into position, the scout near Mars went completely dark. No signals. No movement. It simply powered down, drifting slowly toward the outer edge of the solar system. Its mission over. The transmission to its home fleet? Never completed. The final data packet had been interrupted by Earth's own signal, beamed directly into its receiver with overwhelming clarity. The scout had received the message, and it had chosen to stop. In that moment, no one cheered. No one celebrated. They just stood looking up, breathing the same air, feeling the same weight lift. Not because the danger was gone, but because they had faced it together, without losing themselves. The shield remained active, a silent ring of light around their star. Not a weapon, a promise. And Earth, for the first time, felt not just protected but worthy of protecting. The scout never came back. It drifted farther and farther into the cold dark beyond Neptune, growing fainter until even the most powerful telescopes could barely see it. Eventually it vanished from view, not destroyed, not chased away, but simply gone, like a leaf carried out to sea. And with it went the immediate fear, but not the lessons. In the months that followed, Earth didn't return to the way things were. It couldn't. Too much had changed, not just in orbit, but in people's hearts. The old divisions, borders drawn in ink, arguments over resources, the endless cycle of blame, felt smaller now, almost silly, like squabbling over deck chairs while the whole ship had nearly sunk. Governments didn't dissolve overnight, but they began to share more than just data. They shared responsibility. The United Nations, once seen by many as slow and symbolic, was quietly rebuilt from the ground up, not as a club for diplomats, but as a working body with real authority over planetary defense, climate recovery, and space policy. Every nation had a voice, but decisions were made based on what kept Earth safe and whole, not who shouted the loudest. The rockets that had carried Project Aegis weren't retired. They became the backbone of something new, the Solar Sentinel Network. Dozens of observation posts now floated from Mercury's scorched orbit to the icy edge of the Kuiper Belt, watching not just for threats but for signs of life, for cosmic storms, for anything that might affect the fragile blue world at the center of it all. And this time, the data wasn't locked behind military firewalls. It was shared openly, on public dashboards, in schools, on community screens in town squares. Everyone could see what the Sentinels saw. Everyone was part of the watch. Down on the ground, life settled into a new rhythm. Not perfect, not easy, but more connected. Cities redesigned streets to be walkable again, not just for cars. Rooftops bloomed with gardens. Old factories hummed with new purpose, building clean energy systems instead of weapons. People still argued, still disagreed, but now they asked, how does this help Earth? Before asking, how does this help me? Kids grew up learning a different kind of history. Not just about kings and wars, but about the year the sky went quiet and the world chose to speak as one. They learned how farmers shared seeds during the satellite blackout, how strangers powered hospitals with bicycle generators, how a single message sent not in anger but in warning changed the fate of a planet. And that message? It was still out there, traveling through the stars, a mix of music, math, images of oceans and forests, and the quiet hum of a species that had looked into the abyss and decided to build a bridge instead of a bomb. No one knew if anyone would ever hear it. But Earth sent it anyway, because hope, they realized, wasn't about being sure. It was about trying. The shield around the sun stayed active, not as a threat but as a symbol. A reminder that strength doesn't have to mean violence. That protection can come from unity, not just firepower. Scientists even found peaceful uses for the technology, beaming clean energy to remote areas, helping stabilize Earth's climate by fine-tuning solar reflection during extreme heat waves. There were still hard days. Storms got worse, some old tensions flared, but every time someone suggested going back to the old ways, hoarding, hiding, fighting, The memory of those weeks returned like a quiet voice. We stood together once. We can do it again. At night, people still looked up. But now they didn't just see stars. They saw possibility. And responsibility, because Earth wasn't just a rock spinning in space anymore. It was a home that had proven it was worth defending. Not because it was perfect, but because its people had chosen in their darkest hour to care for each other more than they feared the unknown. No one expected peace to last forever. The universe was too big, too old, too full of surprises. But Earth was ready, not with weapons pointed outward, but with eyes open, hands linked, and a message still echoing into the dark. We are here. We are one. And we will protect this home, with wisdom, with courage, and with each other. And somewhere in the silent stretch between galaxies, the stars listened.